Distinguished guests, my fellow panelists, Ashley, Mr. Sunil Mittal, Sachin, all of them, and the vast audience here, a very good morning to you. I'm truly delighted to be here as India's G20 Sherpa. India is taking over the presidency of G20 on the 1st of December. This is a moment when the world is going through a lot of turmoil. There is a geopolitical crisis in Europe. We are facing a vast downturn as far as SDGs are concerned. 200 million people have gone below poverty line. In the post-COVID era, close to about 100 million people have lost their jobs. So the Sustainable Development Goals, instead of progressing, have actually regressed. We are midway through that 2030 point. There is a huge crisis of global debt. Almost 70 countries in the world are facing a debt crisis. We have the challenge of a global supply chain which is disrupted. You have the challenge of climate action. But every crisis is also an opportunity. And to my mind, this is a huge opportunity for India. And how we make it very action-oriented, how we make it decisive, how we make it reform-oriented is what Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi has talked about at length in Bali. But two things are very clear. One, that India would drive the digital transformation agenda, which I'll dwell on a little bit. Secondly, India will focus on women-led development and what it implies as far as digital transformation is concerned. And therefore, our ability to drive consensus was witnessed in the recently concluded Bali summit, where we brought in a huge amount of consensus between both the developed and the developing world after a series of ministerial meetings had not worked all through. The Prime Minister's message of this era not being an era of war, and that this is an era of diplomacy and dialogue was critical as far as the entire statement was concerned. So India truly demonstrated its ability to build in consensus, and that, to my mind, would be critical all through the year as we unroll the G20 presidency of India. To my mind, there is no doubt that technology will be one of the digital transformation and the digital public infrastructure that India has built up will be a very critical issue because technology can solve some of the most pressing challenges of the world, from accelerating the pace of SDGs, and I personally am of the belief that it's not possible to lift vast segments of people above the poverty line without using technology and data for development in a very big way, because that alone can deepen financial inclusion and can enhance agricultural yield. India is already a very undisputed leader in technology. We are in many ways the tech garage of the world. The world believes in our capabilities at a time when capital was fleeing countries across the world. India, during the COVID period, attracted vast amount of capital. And this was possible. This has been possible because we've done vast amount of digital transformation. We are the #1 smartphone data consumer. We are the #1 global fintech adopter. We have the second highest number of internet users. We have one of the cheapest mobile internet data rates in the world. And we have over 1 billion smartphones, and we are now the world's third largest startup ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, during the first 2 decades of the 21st century, actually the Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, and Microsoft have all been at the center and at the forefront of the massive explosion in innovation and value creation. They have billion-strong users. They have a huge community They have a market value of around 7 trillion US dollar. And they, along with the Chinese firms Alibaba and Tencent, actually have dominated the global sphere in digital advertising, commerce, messaging, cloud infrastructure, social media, and mobile operating systems, amongst many others. In very sharp contrast to this, India has adopted a very unprecedented and a powerful new approach in policy governance through the adoption of digital public infrastructure. This has enabled India to digitally leapfrog in a very big way, with the public sector playing a key role in defining the regulatory guardrails and the private sector innovating and competing in the marketplace. These public digital platforms are open source, they have open APIs, they have open standards for interoperability, and leverage public data for open innovation models. These low-cost and inclusive platforms are based on the core principles of consent-based data sharing protocols, and they have sharply reduced the digital divide in India. They've also created a regulatory level playing field through regulatory framework. Tech innovations normally across history have emerged from the developed world. Digital public infrastructure is an area where an emerging market like India has created a unique model for the world, converging both privacy and innovation. Today, in India, we have a basket of citizen services. You have this jam trinity, which links 1 billion plus biometrics with an equal number of bank accounts and mobile phones to drive financial inclusion. 400 million bank accounts have been created in the last 7 years. During 2015 and 2018, 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world were opened in India. Every second bank account was opened in India. We have a digital tax system in the form of goods and services tax, an online retail platform in the form of GEM portal. The digital health consultations occurs through e-Sanjeevani, and 500 million people, greater than the population of European Union, are covered through the Ayushman Bharat. The health insurance scheme is totally paperless, cashless, is digital. I can be living in Bihar, moving to Tamil Nadu, I'll carry my health insurance with me. 1 billion plus vaccinations were delivered through COVID and UPI, and this has completely transformed the digital payments across the country. India was able to help 470 million during the initial phase of the COVID-19, with all of them receiving benefits directly in their bank account, totally cashless and paperless. So the size and scale has been completely massive. 400 million new bank accounts created since 2015, which is like equivalent to the population of USA. It is twice the population of Russia. We've recorded in 2021 48.6 billion transactions. This is 3x of what China does. This is 7x greater than the combined digital payments of US, Canada, UK, France, and Germany. Over 2 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses via digital, seamless, paperless platform is equivalent to 6 times the population of the United States of America. It is 5 times the population of the European Union and 2.5 times the population of EU and USA combined. Today, the world, if you look around the world, there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity across the world. There are 2 billion people who remain unbanked, and there are over 133 countries which have no digital payment system. This is a huge opportunity. And none of these countries and none of these 4 billion people can be lifted above the poverty line unless we don't use digital transformation. So, ladies and gentlemen, our platform in India create a very powerful integrated stack of building blocks that provide impetus to private sector innovation. They are built to scale. They serve over 1 billion people in 22 languages. A recent study by the Bank of International Settlements has highlighted that on account of the digital public infrastructure that India has built, India has delivered in 7 years what would have taken 46 years to achieve. So 7 years, India has delivered what would have taken 46 years to achieve. Now this, to my mind, is what needs to be done in many other countries. All these platforms have been developed by building an alternative models on principles of openness, equity, inclusivity, fairness, transparency, and trust. And in future, to my mind, this new approach will create a new economic divide between countries who are leapfrogging ahead with digital public infrastructure, which India has developed, versus the rest of the world. The unified public interface in India has gone beyond just being a transformational idea to being a very, very successful case of witnessing exponential growth. The brilliance of UPI lies in the enabling architecture built as a public good. Inherent to the architecture is interoperability, which I talked about, and today UPI ensures nearly 6 billion monthly transactions valued over 121.3 billion US dollar with 260 million users and a merchant base of over 50 million users. Already merchants in 10 countries accept UPI payments, and now over 30 countries actually have expressed interest in adopting UPI. Now, as a result of the Jam Trinity, every household now has access to formal banking services, along with a plethora of availing credit, insurance, pension schemes, and this India stack with its APIs such as Aadhaar authentication, eKYC, and eSign has led to this. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we started the UPI in 2015, when the scheme started, only the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, we opened up the bank accounts. Only 19% of the accounts were operated by women. Just 19%. The latest data which has come in during the last 8 years, 460 million accounts were opened. 56% of these accounts were women-led. And therefore, from 19%, we moved to 46%. The average deposit per account has gone up by 71%. The transformation has been possible only due to the digital public infrastructure. All this has been possible because of the private sector innovation in many ways. Sunil Mittal is sitting here. He's driven this huge innovation in the marketplace. He's competed with Jio in the marketplace. Jio and Airtel have competed in the marketplace. And therefore, this platform approach has actually led to a huge number of innovation by the private sector. Today, there are 30 apps, 30 different apps competing in the marketplace. Apps like PhonePe, Jeep, Google Pay, Amazon Pay are all facilitating payments with the click of a billion. You know, just a one button click and there you are. Now, after this payment system, the focus shifted from payment to consumer and MSME lending. So you have paperless, cashless based lending innovation was done by a range of startups, Lending Cart, Pine Labs, MobiKwik. All of them have done paperless, cashless lending. Then there was increased focus towards personal finances, money management, investments, trading, and a plethora of top-class startups came up, Zerodha, Grow, Upstock. Now we are witnessing emergence of financial products which target more complex segments. Companies such as Digit and Acco are greatly simplifying insurance, covering end-to-end cycle of origination, claims, and selection. I worked in the fisheries sector of Kerala, opening a bank account. My job was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. I could give them outboard motors, I could give them crafts, I could give them fishing nets to go much further into the sea. Opening their bank accounts was the biggest nightmare for me. It used to take me 8 to 9 months to open a bank account. From that journey, I've seen bank accounts being opened in less than a minute for them. And therefore, this has been the transformational journey. My own insurance scheme would take months together. Today, we open insurance schemes in less than 3 minutes, all through this young startups who've transformed India. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as India takes over the presidency of G20, it has a unique opportunity to create a complete package of these digital platforms and deliver them end-to-end as an e-governance service to digitally transform the world. All this, to my mind, in a cloud in a box. We are not looking at infrastructure building in any country, which others have done. We are looking at putting all this in a cloud in a box. There's no better way to enhance India's soft power. Therefore, at G20, we'll all work with countries towards, and in partnership with them, towards promoting digital public infrastructure so that we can deepen financial inclusion, we can improve efficiency of service delivery, we can lead to better women's growth, we can solve challenges of the world by leveraging technology. There is no doubt in my mind that India's tech-enabled digital public infrastructure model, driven by many of our dynamic entrepreneurs, is the very best in the world. Now we must work with countries across the world to help drive digital inclusion at an unprecedented global space, because we believe in one Earth, one family, one future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning to all. I think we had excellent keynote address by Mr. Amitabh Kant. He has set the ball rolling, and I think issues that he has placed on table are absolutely important in terms of how India takes forward the G20 presidency, in what way we showcase India's accomplishment. And I think he's absolutely right in terms of emphasizing bringing in fellow developing countries. His emphasis on Global South is something which is also echoing what Dr. Jaishankar said in the inaugural session and what Prime Minister said in Bali. And I think Mr. Amitabh Kant quoted Prime Minister in terms of bringing forward the idea as to how we take technology to our fellow partner countries. The idea of soft power that Mr. Amitabh Kant alluded to is something which is there. We would have to see how India's traditional negotiating positions, which are there on technology, on access, on equity from technology, its inclusion, they are some of the framework elements which are extremely important when we talk about India's G20 leadership, but also India's prowess related to technology. And that's where I think the new approach, the new power game, as we heard in the inaugural session today, is very important. And I'm so glad to begin, Ashley, with you. As a commentator on geopolitics, how you unbundle the role of technology, as we heard from Mr. Amitabh Kant in the most eloquent manner, as to how our accomplishment not only narrates our own story, but also narrates a story which is becoming almost, if I can bracket it as soft power, which he also did. But in that sense, the geopolitics also dominates. How you see the whole development in the context that you have been commenting on geopolitics?
So thank you, Sachin. Let me address that question in several layers. To start, every age has found some critical driver which drives the economics and the politics of the age. In the early 20th century, it was essentially industrialization and the ability to bend metal. Today, it's technology in different forms, which we loosely describe as information communication technologies, because they are truly ubiquitous. And the countries that dominate computing technologies will essentially be those countries that end up the most competitive in the international system. So as Dr. Jaishankar said this morning, this rivalry is going to be more than just technology. It's going to spin over into politics. Now, what does that mean for India? I think India's digital achievements give it a real leg up in a world that is divided into many competing approaches. So let's start with the United States. The United States has created sophisticated technologies, primarily through the private sector, which has developed both soft and hard infrastructure, and uses product monetization to essentially pay for that development. The EU has essentially piggybacked on that model, but has put very strong privacy rights and consumer rights but essentially on a private sector model. China is an entirely different universe on the opposite side. What India has managed to do is actually bring together the private and the public in a virtuous interaction. And what Mr. Kant spoke earlier about digital public goods serving as the backbone on which many private entities can then piggy on becomes a solution that is very attractive, especially to countries that do not have a highly sophisticated technological sector. So in that sense, we often talk about India as being a bridging power. It's going to be very interesting to see whether the Indian solution, which uses a digital public backbone, creates a platform for private entities to then work off that backbone, becomes the new bridging solutions, particularly in the countries of the global south, where they do not have a private sector of the fecundity and the sophistication that we have in the US. And I think part of India's ambition in the G20 presidency year is really to just promote the use of this model and see whether it can become a new standard for countries outside the advanced OECD economies.
Thank you, Ashley. As you would agree, those who bring in technology on table, they also contribute in terms of how you do the norm setting in terms of global governance. How you look at this new role for India? We have largely been norm takers and not contributing to norm setting. With this rise in technology power that we are talking about, and it is not confined anymore to digital technology per se. We are doing innovation, as Mr. Amitabh Kant emphasized. We are contributing, as Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, in nuclear technology, in biotechnology, and many other, even convergence of nano, biotech, and ICT, unique initiatives by several companies in India now. How you look at India contributing to the global governance component of technology. And from that perspective, I'm also trying to connect what Prime Minister said in Bali at the G20 meet in terms of we contributing and accelerating collective action. So this whole idea of open source technology, unlike what US stood for intellectual property, which is going right up to utility patents and things like that. So how you carve out a situation where you are committed more in terms of collective gain, and which both Dr. Jaishankar and Amitabh Kant emphasized?
So I don't want to have an excessively cynical view on this, but the golden rule is essentially who has the gold makes the rules, right? So it's not sufficient to say that we have a superior conceptual model which is built on open standards. I think you're going to have to ask a second question. Do you have the resources to encourage others to essentially adopt that model and thereby create an ecosystem which creates the opportunities that you want? My view is that India has a brilliant idea. The question that I think still remains to be seen is whether India, one, will have the resources to entice others to adopt that idea, because adoption is a costly process. It does require resource commitments. And two, whether India can persuade the international community, in particular international financial institutions, to provide money to countries to adopt the Indian solution. Now, again, this is where we're going to get into geopolitics. And to be very blunt about it, there is going to be a US model that is very different. And while India and the United States partner in so many areas of geopolitics, this is one area where there will be an uneasy coexistence. And we will have to find terms of managing what will be a rivalry between an open model and a proprietary model. And I think this is a fight that will be worked out country by country, institution by institution. So we are just at the beginning of this process. The last word has not yet been spoken.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. Let me now turn to Mr. Sunil Mittal. Good morning, sir. I think at the outset, as Mr. Amitabh Kant also mentioned, let me congratulate Bharti Enterprises for contributing to the immense infrastructure that the country may be proud of, both in terms of digital infrastructure, but also in terms of connectivity that you have provided. But as it says, dil mange more. So I think what you see in terms of what more is to be done when we talk about digital infrastructure in this country.
Thank you, Sachin. First of all, let me say, even people like us who are long-term practitioners of, digital infrastructure, creating of digital highways in the country, are left stunned when you, in a very small, encapsulated manner, hear all the progress that has been made, that Mr. Kant talked about this morning, the data that he spewed out in terms of the numbers and the sheer scale of what is being done in this country is truly mind-boggling. And that India is now today ready to use that not as a hard gold or hard asset to trade with the world, but what we heard from Mr. Kant was soft power. We will be happy to share the gains that India has made in the digital area with the rest of the world on bases which are not extractive. So India has its oil now, the newfound oil, which is our digital stack, which is our new-found enthusiasm of young tech entrepreneurs, the startup culture, the massive amount of work that has been done on digital identity, the Jam Trinity, as the Prime Minister has titled it, the Jan Dhan, the banking accounts for all, linked through mobile and digital identity, is a very, very powerful tool. And I can tell you, we use it all the time for our KYC, for onboarding millions of customers every week. And the cost to do that is mind-boggling. It's absolutely nothing. We're talking about, you can't even count it in cents. Now, there are countries out there, 133 countries we heard, which are crying out to get onto such kind of activities, and they can't look to the West. It's too expensive. It's IP-based. Anything that you touch from there is extremely expensive. India couldn't afford it, and if India wouldn't have found its own rhythm, it would have been left far behind, because as you all know, India's hard infrastructure is still woefully inadequate. While we are moving at breakneck speed, we need decades to get to a world-class infrastructure. But that is where I would say the digital substitution that we found at a very, very low cost, at frugal levels on mass scale, is the answer to the world. And there will be affluent countries which will want all the bells and whistles that the US will provide. But there are lots of countries. I work in 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. They cannot afford that. But can India plug its soft power there? An absolute yes. And that's something that India is already working on. And I personally feel that this could also be a tool for India to regain or reclaim Africa, which to my mind, the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've lost to China. Africa was always much more closer to India, especially the eastern part of Africa. And it kind of yielded to China, who put out big checks and big projects. And this will be the way for us to get back into African hearts and minds. Coming back to India, I think what was very important was to lay out a digital infrastructure. And I've been a traveler on this journey from 1980 to 83, when we started manufacturing India's first digital phones. And to that extent, I would say what has been achieved here has been absolutely tremendous, whether it's fiber, highways, whether it is the radio waves, whether it's been the massive proliferation of mobile networks. And now the new enthusiasm that India has found through space, which will be the SATCOM delivered to those places, which may perhaps never be covered for the next 10, 15 years, deep in rural India, deserts, mountains, forests, oceans, in air, and all that is coming as well. So I would say India has put in very high amounts of hard dollars in building the infrastructure on which what Mr. Kant described as the ecosystem that has been developed. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. I mean, this is a very, very capital-intensive industry. It requires billions of dollars. It's a relentless thing. Sometimes we feel we are on a treadmill. You just keep on running. I mean, there is really no pause. You move from one technology to another. By the time we had rolled out 3G, it was obsolete. We had to quickly move to 4G. And as we have put out billions of dollars in 4G, including on spectrum, we have 5G upon us, which is probably going to have the fastest and widest rollout anywhere in the world. And we know now the talk of 6G has started. So there is really no respite here. So all I wish is government keeps on looking at this infrastructure, in a more benign way. And one area where I keep on always raising my voice is, it is still a very heavily taxed sector, and that is where the government needs to focus on. If this is indeed the fundamental platform for how India is going to deliver to its masses all the goodies that the government needs to give it to its society, I think we need to be taken better care of. It's very important that we have a robust, sustainable digital infrastructure providers in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. Thanks a lot. Good that you referred to Africa. When I was doing my work, Logic of Sharing with the Oxford University Press, I did visit a couple of African countries and saw the CSR that Airtel is doing in several of these countries. I think it's absolutely important what you emphasized in terms of not just as corporate social responsibility, but also be connecting with Africa, with fellow countries. My next question to you is more in terms of India's G20 presidency. As Mr. Amitabh Kant mentioned, the technology contribution, the role that we discussed this morning of geopolitics, how you look at India's G20 presidency from your own sector and your own experience, how you look at in what way India can contribute, and what are the sectors you think the Indian G20 presidency should contribute in?
Well, I think G20 has come to this country under this presidency at a very difficult time at one level, but equally a very, very important and exciting time. What can India contribute through this 1 year of presidency? I think a lot of things can be done. First and foremost, I think world is a very fractured place today. Unfortunately, we'll be taking over when the world is really, in many parts of the globe, at loggerheads. There are many fault lines that have developed in the last just 12 months, 24 months. And can India, use its, strengths, its long-standing image of a peace-loving nation to bring some of these warring factions together? And we all know that India can really talk to both sides. And that is the power that India enjoys. It is accepted by both sides. More importantly, the two warring factions also accept India as, in some sense, a peace broker. So India has a role to play. And it can probably use this platform to start to bring some harmony around the globe. We will never be able to probably agree on all the issues, but there are larger issues at stake. People will be really facing poverty and hunger across the globe. We need to fix the situation there. Secondly, much has been talked about. I won't take too much time. India will use this opportunity for calling out on the digital divide. And I think the Prime Minister made a point in Indonesia that that will be one of the areas where Government of India will work. And the third one really is India will connect G20 to Africa in a much more deeper and meaningful way. And it must do that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Mittal. Let me now turn to Ms. Nivruti Rai. Thanks a lot for joining the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As you heard Mr. Kant, explaining in terms of what would be our priority, what would be our connect. We also heard Mr. Mittal explaining out his ideas and his recommendations and suggestions. Let me bring to you the Bali Declaration, where they have talked about digital connectivity, digital infrastructure. And that's where I would very much like to ask you how you see this whole question of digital infrastructure, particularly if I juxtapose requirements that are there in our own neighborhood. Since I'm also on the board of the Reserve Bank, we are grappling with this question of SWIFT and the alternatives of SWIFT and the challenges that we are facing in several parts of the world. So how you look at this infrastructure more from the point of view of our neighbors? How do we facilitate? As you are aware, one of the morning's breakfast discussion here is also about digital currency. So how you look at this question of infrastructure and neighborhood?
Sure, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. And you heard a little bit of what, you talked about Africa and importance of Africa and the distance, proximity to India versus China. Let me just set a little bit of a context. During COVID, what happened? The world ran on the technologies of shoulders of technology. Whether it was shopping, whether it was actually working, it did not matter where you were located. That told me that distance does not matter. What matters is trust, and what matters is technology. So just for a moment, I'm trying to make you imagine a world map. Today, the world map is based on geography, the land masses, the water. What I'm imagining is a world map which is based on technology, which is based on digital, and which is based on trust. What you will see is a map that emerges where India will have neighbors who we trust. Whether it is United States, whether it is Israel, whether it is Japan, whether it's Australia based on Quad or I2U2 or G20, you name it, it's going to be based on trust. Now, how this will happen is you will not see a political map, you'll not see a geographical traditional map, you'll see a digital map. And all of the countries will be connected which have trust. And believe me, we have technologies already that can enable. There's digital highway that we just heard that is being built. Already, many of us have experienced sporadic 5G on our phones, and you see the value of 5G. But the roads up to 4G were getting heavily overutilized. So then we opened up 30 gigahertz beyond, more highways for 5G. What I want to say is, if the world is going to be built on digital trust and trust-based geography, what is going to define, what used to be land is data. Data and the trust based on data, the corridors that you build with other nations, and therefore the value that you can bring based on collaborative trust and innovation and invention. India is synonymous to data, India is synonymous to software, and India is synonymous to the large number of people, which is essentially data factory. What we need to do to build those infrastructure is focus on two things: manufacturing, and manufacturing with quality. And the other thing is stable policies. And I really believe that the need of the world is collaborative innovations, and we have a lot to offer. We need to build those trust-based geographies that can drive innovation. So the infrastructure that I talked about is going to be leveraging the highways that are already being built and technologies that can then offset the data privacy, the data localization, all of those requirements through technologies like federated learning. Federated learning will enable your data to stay where it is and yet create the value of the data where the data is required. So I honestly believe digital neighbor is what you're talking about. Digital trust-based geography is what we're talking about, and then leverage all of that, and that's the infrastructure. The other thing I want to highlight is, I come from a semiconductor industry, so I have to bring it up. The semiconductor market today is about $500 billion. By 2027, 2030, the semiconductor requirement is going to become $1 trillion. Synonymous to that, in India today, the data centers that we have, whether it is enterprise or whether it's hyperscaler, we have about 750 megawatt of data center requirement today. My belief is by 2027, 2030, it's going to at least double. So 2 gigawatt is the need. Just like semiconductor is doubling up, data center is going to double up. So in digital infrastructure is digital connectivity. Digital infrastructure is digital storage, which is these data centers, and we have to enable doubling up, if not more. And the last thing is, compute, artificial intelligence, hyperscalers, HPC, high performance kind of compute. And I honestly believe that India, by 2025, will have its own indigenous HPC if it works with its strength, which is software. And like I said yesterday, hardware is nothing different than software. It's a very expensive software that gets printed. So leverage our software and mathematical capability, leverage our people, and enable it with stable policy.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Rai. I think, as you rightly said, we need manufacturing and we need stable policy. Before Mr. Amitabh Kant moved out of Niti Aayog, one important contribution, brilliant contribution, was PLI scheme. That has given huge impetus to manufacturing, and that was a paradigm shift, because hitherto we assumed that services sector would steer us through, but now we are realizing that for Atmanirbhar India, we have to have manufacturing with us. You emphasize that point. My question to you is in terms of India's self-sufficiency in this sector, or even to bring in supply chain resilience, how you look at the next few policy steps that are needed to go in that direction?
The way I look at how policy can enable in many different ways is you have to look at the entire end-to-end system. If you talk about semiconductors, if you talk about manufacturing, you have to look at supply and you have to look at demand. So the ecosystem needs to be built up for manufacturing. In terms of, I'll just give you an example of semiconductors, you have to have fabulous design houses. You have to be building IPs. You have to be able to either import those very expensive equipments, because I don't think self-reliance, self-sufficiency means do everything yourself. You need to lead to do, and then bring in things that you don't want to build expertise. So my whole suggestion is look at the entire supply demand, look at all of the components that are going to be required, from raw materials, from clean gases, from water. Just let me tell you, for a fab, which a lot of us are so interested in, each day, a mega fab needs 12 million liters of water a day. Smaller fabs, can go with 1/4 of it, which translates into thousands of people's need of water. So we have to have that ability. So before we start thinking, there are many, crawl, walk, run kind of steps. Enable assembly, enable packaging, enable validation of semiconductors. Then look at, what can we do in terms of, and this journey doesn't have to be, several years. We can do it in few years. Like I said, I believe in partnership. China was not built by itself. China started supporting United States for manufacturing. Japan at one point of time was very poor in quality. I remember my parents used to say, Japani hai kya? To now, when you look at the quality, it's amazing. You look at, many countries which thought their race was, supreme, getting down to supreme quality. So we have to look at, what are some of the lessons. I know that history is a good teacher. You don't always, plan on history, but you learn from history. And therefore, I really believe that our manufacturing has to be given importance. Quality is something, enabling policy where we can import certain things that we do not want to build, but drive with leadership and build a vision that we can accomplish.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Rai, for detailed explanation in terms of how you see manufacturing. Let me now turn to Mr. Amitabh Kant. Sir, you explained this idea that India has in terms of our G20 presidency, India emerging as a force for good, contributing in terms of new areas as geopolitics, geo-environment is evolving. How you see India playing that role of force for good, and in what way you think we can contribute?
So Sachin, I've been a long-term believer that you can't transform the lives of citizens without going digital and without going green. And, actually, it's been 3.5 years while I carry debit card and credit cards, I've not used them in India. I've not been to a ATM machine for over 4 years. I've not been to a physical bank for over 5 years, and I think physical banks in India are almost virtually dead now. The only time I've used my debit credit card was when I went to San Francisco to meet my daughter to hire a Uber car. Throughout the COVID, I got my shots, my booster shot. It was all digital. My daughters were all paperwork in United States. So what it really demonstrates is that in terms of technology, we are way ahead. We are way ahead. This has happened not because of government alone. This has been a unique work of private sector innovating on top of the rail track built by the government. And that innovation, as I mentioned, a whole range of innovators in the private sector have done. So my view is that if you want to transform the lives of 4 billion people of the world who do not have a digital identity, if you want to transform the lives of 2 billion people who do not have a bank account, I mean, we've put 470 million bank accounts, we've put money, 600 schemes of the government, we put money straight into the bank account without a single paisa of leakage. I have also worked in the same government where almost, one of our prime ministers said 85% of the rupee that we give was a leakage. We now do 600 schemes without a single paisa of leakage straight into the bank account of the beneficiary. And therefore, all through the COVID, we could take care of our citizens because of the infrastructure built. Now, this means that it has required a huge amount of work around digital identity first. Without identity, it wouldn't have worked. It has required a huge amount of work and a huge amount of political will to build bank accounts for every citizen. And it has shown tremendous amount of private enterprise that 850 million people in India have smartphones. I mean, these are the people who've transformed. So if you want to transform lives in South Africa, or if you want to transform lives in Africa or Latin America, and if you want to ensure that they are able to get government benefits, or if they are able to really transform agriculture or education or health, there is no other option but to do the kind of digital transformation model which India has pursued. It can't be the big tech model of the United States. It just can't be. It can't be on the basis of the model built by Europe, which is focused on privacy but killed innovation. And therefore, the model for the rest of the world is what India has built. And that is the model which will transform lives. So if you want a human-centric approach to growth, if you want to transform citizens' life, if you want to transform lives of women, which India has done now, the only way out for financial inclusion and for many other transformations will be the model which India has pursued. And therefore, it's not about putting bucks, it's about spreading this model of innovation and this rail tracks across many of these underdeveloped and developing countries of the world. But you have to understand that there are 70 countries in the world which are facing a global debt crisis. And they are facing a global debt crisis because some countries in the world have given them global debt. They've given them debt which is totally opaque, which is non-transparent. Totally opaque, non-transparent. In some countries, the deal was that you'll not even bring it before the parliament of that country. We are not saying that. We are doing it in a very transparent manner, that this is something which has been built. Please take it. And take it through our innovators. And this is the only way you'll be able to transform the world.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kant. I think as we heard in the video that was played before this session, Melinda mentioned in terms of digital divide, and you just now referred to that. How you see global community can work together, India can provide the necessary leadership in terms of overcoming this digital divide, because still quite a few people are left outside this ambit of digital empowerment that you are referring to.
So, Sachin, first and foremost, you have to understand that, America has built up a model where it has made itself dependent on one supplier across the world. There are top 12, look at the top 15 companies of the United States of America. 89 to 92% supply is coming from one supplier across the world. It's not about decoupling, it's about totally demonopolizing this. Unless and until you don't demonopolize, look at the situation you're ending up. 44% of the chip supply coming from Taiwan. 44% of the chip supply coming from Taiwan. China-Taiwan crisis comes in. America does sanctions. The whole world comes to a standstill. Defense manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, mobile manufacturing. America will put the whole world to a standstill. And therefore, it's for America to understand that it needs to build many other suppliers across the world. Their companies are still not getting away from the earlier model that they've built up. And it's for Tellis to respond to this.
Ashley. Actually, hold on.
dying to. I'm dying to.
You got excited, actually.
So I want to make 2 points.
Yeah, okay.
We cannot conduct these conversations as if every outcome is a product of state choice. There is an entire universe out there of business entities which are going to make decisions based on efficiency and profit. If we've ended up with a particular ecology of semiconductor manufacturing, it is because some countries in the world have demonstrated extraordinary efficiency and have utilized those efficiencies to develop monopolies. Now, the state, when it is confronted with these monopolies, basically shudders and looks for ways of diversification. But to imagine that the state is going to find a solution to what is a normal process of distribution decisions and allocation decisions made in the marketplace, I think is fatal. And it goes back to a point that Nivruti made earlier when we talk about manufacturing. Yeah. Just because we care about ensuring ourselves against worst-case outcomes, we cannot pursue economic policies that take us exactly to that place where we produce worst-case outcomes. In other words, we cannot have national strategies that are oblivious to notions of comparative advantage, that are oblivious to notions of efficiency. If you attempt to create an economic system where you throw comparative advantage and efficiency out of the window, you are not going to create the world that you want. So the challenge for us is to take the ideas that Amitabh laid out, which are attractive on their own terms, and begin to ask ourselves hard questions. Who's going to finance this? On what terms? These are the kinds of issues that I think are going to become the debates in India's G20 presidency. Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to use the bully pulpit to talk about the India model. The India model is very attractive. But the India model is not cost-free. Someone has to pay for it. Someone has to pay for those railway tracks, which the Indian people paid for over the last several decades, right? Those are the kinds of issues that I think are going to be bread and butter issues that we've got to think about as we go through the next year.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. I think as an economist, I have a problem in terms of how geopolitics dominates the whole idea of efficiency and productivity. The idea of dominance takes precedence in terms of decisions on productivity and efficiency. But let me now, I think, just quickly open the floor. If there are one or two questions. Rudra, I think we have a few minutes. Yeah. So I think we can take at least 2 or 3 questions here. Yes, right in the middle here.
Can I take a question?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Smita Sharma. I'm an independent journalist. To Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal, on the draft telecom bill, there are apprehensions that this is an overreach on the scope beyond telecom and perhaps a return to the license Raj in the Department of Telecom. Your thoughts, sir, reservations, concerns? And Mr. Amitabh Kant, Dr. Jaishankar spoke about geopolitical trust. You are talking about a humanitarian digital transformation. But India, unfortunately, has a dubious distinction of being among the top countries where digital shutdowns are happening frequently, affecting the life and liberties of human beings. You have a data privacy bill. The new version looks even worse off than the last version that came in, with serious concerns about data privacy. So, the kind of challenges that we face really domestically when we talk about geopolitical trust.
Thank you. I would just pick up 2 more questions and then would come back to my panel. Anybody, I think you have to come at the mic and speak there. So anybody who's...
Hi.
Yeah, please.
Hi, this is Harsh from Google Research. Thank you for the talks. So Mr. Ashley mentioned the open model versus the proprietary model. Great point. So I think after payments, the next frontiers are in agriculture, health, languages, where again, open secure data and open models can actually pave the way for innovation. We want to support that. But the challenge we face sometimes in nodal agencies is infrastructure, where we are retro moving from secure to the data centers, and a lack of trust. My question is, how can public sector and private sector together solve these problems for innovation for the future? Thank you.
Thank you. I would take one more, I think, here on this side. Yeah.
Hello. Yes, so I just wanted to talk about digital assets that was briefly discussed in the panel. What is India's current stance in terms of having building towards a larger ecosystem? Of course, it has been, India has been looking forward to international collaboration, but if we just keep that aside and just talk about India's stance, because on one side we see humongous taxes that have been imposed, and on the other we see India trying to be the leader in taking these conversations forward. So what is being done in that particular domain?
Thank you. I would now turn back to my panel. Would request Sunilji to start.
Well, just before answering the question, I would just like to, add that, sort of join in what Mr. Kant and Ashley have talked about, mitigation plans for the world, Ashley, I mean, you and I have worked together for over a decade now, and, we agree on a lot of things, but on this particular one, I think it will be disingenuous for us to say that the policy making does not shift centers of gravity. It does. That China today is the world's factory is an outcome of a major policy decision taken decades back by the US. It could have been India, by the way. Somehow the eagle never sort of landed here. It sort of flew over us many times, but finally went to China. The fact is that was the policy choice. And I think what Mr. Kant is saying is probably important, that today there are levers of policymakers to shift those such that nobody ever comes to a point where we suffer heavily. So I would say in that regard, India and US are cooperating in technology, in space, in defense now, and that will ensure in the next 10, 12 years, we'll have a better balance. So that's the only point I will make. To answer to the point on the draft digital policy that has been put out, I think it's still a draft, first of all. A lot of debate is going on, deliberations are going on, a ton of comments have been received by the government back. What will finally come out, I think we need to hold my breath there. My own view is government is very alive. To my mind, the policy from the old NTP that I have worked with to where we are today has been a progressive one, taking into account not only the needs of the society, but importantly, the massive shifts in technology. Today, a mobile phone is a television, and a television is an internet now. I mean, the world is dramatically altered from where the national telecom policy was. So I would say, let's not prejudge before anything is finalized. To my mind, there's every voice in the market is talking about their needs, and they are lobbying for their own corners. My own view is we have a very, very, sound government, very solid leadership here, which will decide and determine what is best for our country. In the end, you are in a democratic setup, and they are following the norms of inviting comments. They are deliberating upon it. You are already seeing shifts. There was a noise about TRA powers being compromised. I think the government has already clarified that is not the case. So I would say we should be very positive in looking towards the future, because India is committed to a digital framework that enables the society to thrive.
Ms. Rai, you want to add anything?
The only thing I can say is, when you look at India, there are two ways to look at India. And I've been, from working in an MNC, a US-based company, I've been saying this to my company as well. Look at India with the GDP number, and look at India with the GDP per capita number. When you look at GDP, of course, you can compare India to a Germany, to a UK and France and so on. When you think of the infrastructure that is required for many of these technologies to be able to work, whether it's digital highway, whether it's the trusted corridor, you need to think of India and central GDP kind of capability. So I really think the platform we need to build is competitive, comparative to the kind of countries I mentioned. However, when it comes to consumption, you have to look at enabling the GDP per capita, which means you have to enable your technology to be affordable, to be scalable. And one thing I want to tell you, and I kind of, echoing to what Mr. Kant said, think of India. The amount of data you consume per month is leading the world with the cheapest 25 cents as compared to $10 in so many countries. We are consuming the maximum number of gigabits per month, which means if data was currency, you are consuming the most amount of currency. And that's why most innovation is required, because there's a huge gap between our GDP and GDP per capita. But looking at what the government has enabled, whether it's a platform for digital identity, unified payment, there is health platform being built. I'm myself interested in building AI open source platform to enable the GDP per capita to leverage that and drive those startups. So I really believe India has tremendous opportunity, and whether it is central level government or whether it's huge companies like Airtel or Reliance, each one of them have an onus to look at how do we build that platform that the rest of India can innovate on and build those, many, startups and new technologies. We need to enable, and the onus is on people like me as well. So I really feel that the government has to play its part in building those platforms. The companies sitting here have to play their part in building that platform such that the rest of India, the 65% of India which is living in the rural areas, can get connected, can get access to education, can get access to the healthcare. So I really feel that we can do it, and we need to work together.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Rai. Actually, any closing sentence? One sentence?
I just wanted to say something in response to the question asked about the public versus the private sector. And my prejudices are very simple. The private sector is a far more efficient provider of goods and services than government. And the role of government must be to establish sound policy frameworks and to address questions of market failure. If the government does those two things well, the private sector will take care of the rest.
Sir.
No, I agree with Ashley that sound policy frameworks are critical. But sound policy frameworks should not lead to over-dependence and one country and building monopolies in one part of the world. Secondly, sound policy framework should not lead to excessive protectionism, which the present Inflation Reduction Act of United States of America, Mr. Biden has got all policy framework right now, except for the IRA protectionism. You are saying that I'm going to give $3 per kilogram for green hydrogen produced in the United States of America, even though I'm not climatically suitable and even though I may be the most inefficient in the world. I mean, India's climatically blessed. That one policy has brought green hydrogen projects from Australia to India to Korea, all over the world, to a standstill. Get the policy framework right if you feel that the government policies are critical. Without that, you will not enable, instead of making the world go green, you brought going green to a standstill.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think a big hand to my panel. This was really very exciting, very stimulating panel discussion today. I think there is no need for me to summarize it. You must have gathered the perspectives that are emerging, the conflicts, the contestations that are there in the policy regime, the need for global leaders to be more responsible when they are setting the norms, when they are grappling with the world which is getting shifted to another part of the globe. And that, I think, is something we all have to prepare ourselves to. As Mr. Kant said, norm setting is something which I emphasized in the beginning is extremely important, and that to be inclusive is absolutely necessary. With technology, as we heard in the first session, in this session, that base is evolving, that is changing. We heard the panel, India's G20 presidency would contribute in terms of this new order emanating out of the strength of technology. It is applicable as much as to access of technology that is there, both in the frontier areas as well as in traditional areas, but it is also equally important for finance, not only from financial inclusion perspective, but also in terms of the way norms like Basel norms have been defined. The fact that fragmentation of finance has come in, largely, again, the credit goes to the United States of America. For fragmentation of development finance, green finance, SDG-aligned finance, and finance that is coming on table under the umbrella of climate finance. So I think this fragmentation of finance, the fragmentation of technology governance regimes, and the beneficiaries, the huge digital divide that Melinda Gates talked about in her presentation today in the video. I think there are several issues that our panel has raised. I'm sure Rudra and his team must have captured. So thanks a lot. A big hand to my panel, and we stop here. Thank you.